My husband inherited $500 million after his father's funeral, and the very next day, he kicked me out of the house. I didn't see it coming. Looking back, that's what hurt the most. Not the betrayal itself, not even the sheer cruelty of it, but the suddenness, the unexpectedness of what unfolded. In just a few days, my entire life turned upside down. I had been married to Derek for 15 years. 15 years of building a life together, facing challenges, supporting each other through thick and thin. We had weathered job changes, family dramas, and moves to new cities. I always believed that what we had was solid, unbreakable. We had always seemed to approach things as a team. There were ups and downs, but our bond felt strong. Or so I thought. I had no idea that money, this massive inheritance, would change everything in the blink of an eye. The last time I felt truly connected to Derek was at his father's funeral. We had been dealing with grief for weeks, but that day was the culmination of it all. Derek and his father, Richard, had always had a complicated relationship. Richard was a self-made billionaire, a man who had built his empire from nothing. He was tough, relentless, and expected the same from everyone around him, especially his only son. Derek, however, had never shared his father's drive for business. He had always been more interested in living a life free from the cutthroat world Richard thrived in. Their differences created tension, and the rift between them had widened over the years. Despite their conflicts, I always felt that there was still respect, a deep, unspoken love between them. Richard was a hard man, but he cared for Derek in his own way, and Derek, though he struggled to show it, cared for him too. The funeral itself was extravagant, a grand affair, just as you'd expect for a man of Richard's wealth and stature. The church was packed with people, many of whom I had never met. Business associates, old friends, distant family members we hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone was there, but I wasn't focused on any of them. My attention was on Derek. He stood at the front, stoic and somber, delivering a eulogy that was heartfelt yet brutally honest. He spoke about their complicated relationship, acknowledging the conflicts they had endured over the years, but also paying tribute to the lessons his father had taught him. Derek's vulnerability in that moment was striking. I had never seen him look so open, so raw. It made me want to reach out to him, to hold him, to comfort him in any way I could. I thought we would face this grief together. I assumed that, as always, we would come out on the other side stronger. I couldn't have been more wrong. The day after the funeral, everything began to unravel. Derek had a meeting with the lawyer to finalize his father's will. I knew Richard had left behind a substantial estate, but I didn't concern myself with the details. Derek had always been financially comfortable, thanks to his father's help, and we had built a life together that wasn't solely defined by wealth, or so I had believed. That evening, Derek came home late. I remember the way he walked through the door, his face unreadable. Something was clearly weighing on him, but when I asked how the meeting went, he brushed off my question with a curt, "Fine." It was unlike him to be so short with me, so distant. I sensed something was wrong, but I didn't press him. I gave him space, assuming that he just needed time to process everything. Later that night, I was sitting in the living room, reading a book and waiting for him to join me. I heard his footsteps behind me, and when I turned around, the look on his face made my heart stop. His eyes were cold, hard in a way that I had never seen before. His jaw was clenched, and there was no trace of the man I had known for so many years. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I closed my book, suddenly feeling a wave of dread wash over me. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to steady my voice, but my heart was already pounding in my chest. Derek didn't sit down. Instead, he stood over me, arms crossed, his posture rigid. "I met with the lawyer today," he said bluntly. "I inherited everything. $500 million. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. $500 million. It was a staggering amount of money, more than I could even comprehend. But something about the way he said it, the flatness of his tone, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "That's incredible," I said slowly, trying to gauge his mood. I didn't understand why he seemed so tense, so distant. We'll be able to do so much with that. We can help so many people. Derek cut me off with a sharp, bitter laugh that sent a chill down my spine. There is no we, Rachel. This is my money, and it's time for you to leave. I felt the words at me like a punch to the gut. What? I whispered, unable to believe what I had just heard. You heard me, Derek said, his voice cold, emotionless. I want you out. I don't need you anymore. I don't want you anymore. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. Derek, what are you talking about? I said, my voice trembling. We've been married for 15 years. I've stood by you through everything. How can you just throw me away like this? His eyes were like ice, completely unrecognizable. I've been thinking about this for a long time, he said, his words so detached that they barely seemed real. You're a drain on me, Rachel. You've been holding me back. Now that I have the money, I don't need to keep pretending, holding him back. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. This was a man I had loved, the man I had shared my life with. How could he say these things to me? How could he mean them? Derek, please. I begged, my voice shaking. Let's talk about this. We can figure this out. You don't mean this. But he did mean it. I could see it in his eyes. There was no warmth left, no trace of the man I had married. You need to leave, he repeated, his voice hard. Pack your things and go. I'll make sure you're taken care of financially, but I don't want to see you again. I stood there, frozen in shock, as my entire world fell apart. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But it was. That night, I packed my bags, tears streaming down my face, as I tried to make sense of everything. Derek stood there, unmoved, watching me without a word as I gathered my things. He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't try to comfort me. It was as if the man I had known and loved for 15 years had disappeared, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I left the house, our home, and checked into a hotel, my mind spinning. How had this happened? How had Derek become so cold, so cruel? Was it the money? Had the inheritance changed him? Or had he always been this way, hiding his true self behind a mask of love and devotion? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I was too overwhelmed by the shock, the pain, the betrayal. In a matter of hours, my entire life had been torn apart. My husband, my home, my future, all gone. The next morning, something entirely unexpected happened. I was still half asleep, the soft glow of the sunrise barely filtering through my curtains, when my phone rang. The sound startled me, piercing the quiet morning air. Groggily, I reached for it, expecting some kind of routine message or perhaps a wrong number. But when I glanced at the screen, my heart skipped a beat. Derek's name flashed across the display and I froze. It had only been a few hours since he had thrown me out of our home. He had been so cold, so certain in his decision. And now, here he was, calling me as if nothing had happened. For a moment, I thought about letting it go to voicemail, about ignoring him the way he had ignored my pain the night before. But something held me back. Curiosity, maybe. A need to understand why he was calling now, after everything that had just transpired. I took a breath and answered, my voice shaky. Hello, Rachel. Derek's voice came through the line, but it wasn't the detached, emotionless tone I had heard last night. This time, he sounded different, panicked, almost breathless. The change in his demeanor was unsettling. I need your help, he said, his words rushed and stumbling over each other. I blinked, struggling to comprehend what he was saying. My help? After the way he had treated me, after the things he said? I couldn't believe it. You threw me out, Derek. I reminded him, incredulity dripping from my voice. You told me you didn't want me anymore. I know, he replied quickly, desperation evident in every syllable. But something's happened. Something bad. I don't know what to do. His words barely registered as I sat there in silence, trying to make sense of the situation. The nerve of him to ask for my help after everything he had put me through. My mind raced, struggling to catch up with this bizarre turn of events. What are you talking about? I finally managed, my voice cold and distant. Derek took a deep, shaky breath on the other end of the line, as if he was bracing himself for what he was about to say. I got a call this morning from the lawyer. There's a problem with the inheritance. The word inheritance made my heart stutter for a moment. What kind of problem? I wondered, though I kept my composure. What kind of problem? I asked, forcing myself to remain calm. It's complicated, he stammered, the tension in his voice growing. There are conditions in the will, conditions I didn't realize. I didn't know how serious they were. Conditions? I repeated, my mind whirling. What could he possibly be talking about now? Yes, Derek replied, and I could hear the fear creeping into his tone. My dad. He put a clause in the will. If I don't meet the conditions, I lose everything. The money, the house, everything. I felt a rush of anger flare up inside me. This was what it had come down to. After everything he had done, after throwing me away like I was nothing, the only reason he was calling me was because he was afraid of losing his precious inheritance. Typical Derek, always thinking about himself, always putting his own interests above everything else. And what does that have to do with me? I asked, my voice sharp and unforgiving. There was a brief silence on the other end before Derek spoke again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. The will says I have to stay married, he admitted. If I get divorced, I lose it all. The sheer absurdity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't help but feel a bitter, sarcastic laugh rise in my throat. Of course, this was about money. It was always about money with Derek. So, let me get this straight, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You threw me out, told me you didn't want me anymore, and now you're calling me because you need me to stay married to you so you can keep your $500 million? Rachel, please, Derek begged, his voice growing more frantic by the second. I didn't know about the clause. You thought you could just toss me aside and go on with your life without me? I interrupted, my anger boiling over. And now you expect me to help you? After everything you said, after everything you did? I was wrong, Derek blurted out, his voice strained with panic. I was stupid. I don't know what I was thinking, but please, I need you. The silence that followed was heavy, tense. I could hear Derek's breathing on the other end, each exhale shaky and uneven. But I didn't care. I didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy for him. Not anymore. No, Derek. I finally said, my voice calm but firm. You made your choice. You wanted me out of your life. Now, you're going to have to live with the consequences. Rachel, please, he begged, his voice breaking. I'll lose everything. And you deserve to, I replied coldly. Goodbye, Derek. I hung up the phone, feeling an overwhelming sense of closure settle over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of control. Derek had always been the one calling the shots, the one making decisions. But not anymore. He had thought he could treat me like I was disposable, like I didn't matter. But he was wrong. Now, he was the one facing the consequences of his actions. In the days that followed, I learned more about the details of Richard's will. It turned out that Derek's father had been more cunning than either of us had anticipated. The inheritance came with several stipulations, one of which was that Derek had to remain married to me for at least 10 more years if he wanted to receive the full amount. If he filed for divorce or if I left him, the money would be split among various charities that Richard had supported throughout his life. Derek tried calling me several more times in the days that followed, his desperation growing with each ignored call. But I didn't care anymore. I didn't care about the money or what happened to him or his inheritance. What I cared about was my freedom, my dignity. For 15 years, I had stood by Derek's side, supported him, believed in him. And in the end, he had shown me exactly what he thought of me, nothing. But now, I was free. free from his lies, free from his cruelty, free from his selfishness. And whatever came next, I knew I would be okay, because I was stronger than Derek had ever given me credit for. And that strength was worth more than any inheritance he could offer.